The threshold. The last thing Marcus Webb remembered was the screech of tires and the sickening crunch of metal against bone. Then, silence. Not the absence of sound, but something deeper. A silence that felt like being underwater, muffled and heavy. When awareness returned, he found himself standing in a place that shouldn't exist. It wasn't quite a room. The walls, if they could be called walls, seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with a rhythm that matched no heartbeat he'd ever known. The floor beneath his feet was solid, yet when he looked down, he could see through it into an impossible darkness that swirled with distant lights, like galaxies drowning in ink. "Hello, Marcus." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. Marcus spun around, and that's when he saw him. The gatekeeper stood impossibly tall, his form constantly shifting at the edges, as if reality couldn't quite decide what shape he should take. One moment he appeared as an old man with kind eyes, the next as something ancient and terrible, with too many angles and shadows that fell in the wrong directions. His face settled into something almost human, sharp features, dark eyes that held the weight of eternities, and a smile that was neither cruel nor kind. Where am I?" Marcus's voice sounded strange to his own ears, hollow and echoing. "Between," the gatekeeper replied simply. "Between what was and what comes next. Between the ending and the beginning. Between judgment and mercy." Marcus's hands trembled as fragmented memories crashed over him. The intersection. His daughter's birthday party. He'd been rushing, checking his phone, and then. "Am I dead?" "Yes." The gatekeeper's answer was matter-of-fact, devoid of comfort or apology. "Your body ceased functioning approximately 7 minutes ago. Paramedics are still working on it, but we both know it's futile. The damage was extensive." Marcus felt his knees weaken, but he didn't fall. He couldn't fall here. This is it, then. This is, what? Heaven? Hell? Judgment? The gatekeeper tilted his head, and for a moment, his form flickered, 1,000 faces superimposed over one another, each wearing a different expression of ancient wisdom. Those are human words for human concepts. What comes next is far more interesting than your primitive binaries of reward and punishment. He gestured, and the impossible space around them shifted. The breathing walls pulled back, revealing a vast expanse of darkness punctuated by 3 distinct doorways. Each door was different. The first was wooden and warm, carved with images of family dinners and childhood laughter. The second was sleek and modern, metallic, reflecting success and ambition. The third was rough, ancient stone, weathered by countless years and marked with symbols Marcus didn't recognize. "I am the gatekeeper," the being continued, his voice taking on a ceremonial quality. "I stand at the threshold of what your kind calls the afterlife. But here's what they never tell you in your churches and temples, Marcus. Here's the secret that would shatter your philosophers and drive your theologians mad." He stepped closer, and Marcus could smell something like ozone and old books and funeral flowers. "You get a choice. A choice. Behind each of these doors lies a life. Not your life, you've already lived that one, and frankly, it was mediocre at best. No, these are other lives. 3 alternatives. 3 paths you could have walked, had circumstances been different. Had you made different choices. Had chance and chaos arranged themselves in other patterns." The gatekeeper raised one long finger, pointing to each door in turn. "The first door leads to a life of happiness. Genuine, uncomplicated joy. You'll know love, family, contentment. You'll die old and satisfied, surrounded by people who cherish you. It's everything the human heart claims to want." He moved to the second door, his reflection fracturing across its metallic surface. "The second door leads to a life of power and achievement. You'll shape the world, Marcus. Your name will echo through history. You'll have influence, respect, the ability to change the course of human events. You'll die knowing you mattered in ways most people never will." Finally, he indicated the ancient stone door. As Marcus looked at it, he felt something cold crawl down his spine. The third door leads to a life of discovery. You'll uncover secrets that humanity isn't ready for. You'll peer behind the curtain of reality itself and understand things that would break ordinary minds. You'll die having seen truths that are both terrible and magnificent. Marcus stared at the 3 doors, his mind reeling. I don't understand. Why? Why give me this choice? The gatekeeper's smile widened, becoming something alien and unsettling. Because, Marcus Webb, you are not the first to stand here, and you won't be the last. Because the universe is not a linear story with a single narrator. Because consciousness is far stranger than your species ever imagined. Because. He leaned in close, his breath cold against Marcus's ear. Someone has to choose. What happens after? Marcus asked, his voice barely a whisper. After I live one of these lives. Then you come back here. And we have another conversation. And then. The gatekeeper straightened, his form solidifying into something more human, more approachable. That, Marcus, is the question, isn't it? That's why I'm here. That's why you're here. The universe is full of doors, and someone needs to open them. Marcus looked at each door again, his mind racing. Happiness. Power. Truth. 3 lives. 3 possibilities. He thought of his actual life, the one he'd just lost. The mistakes he'd made. The daughter he'd never see grow up. The wife he'd argued with that morning about something stupid and trivial. How do I choose, he asked. How am I supposed to know which one is right? The gatekeeper's laugh was like wind chimes made of bones. Right? Oh, Marcus. There is no right. There's only choice, and consequence, and the infinite paths between them. He spread his arms wide, and the 3 doors began to glow with an inner light. But choose you must. That's the rule. That's always been the rule. Stand here too long, and the choice will be made for you, and trust me, you don't want that. Marcus felt pressure building around him, the breathing walls contracting slightly, pushing him toward decision. What if I choose wrong? The gatekeeper's eyes gleamed with something that might have been amusement, or pity, or both. Then you'll discover just how wrong a choice can be. But here's the beautiful part, Marcus. Here's what makes this all worthwhile. He moved closer again, his face inches from Marcus's, and in his eyes, Marcus saw reflections of countless other people, countless other moments just like this one. You'll never know if you chose wrong, until you do. The doors pulsed with light, waiting. The gatekeeper stepped back, folding his hands, patient and eternal. Marcus Webb stood at the threshold between death and something else, between the life he'd lost and the lives he might live, and understood that whatever came next would change him in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. The doors waited. The gatekeeper smiled. And the choice was his to make. Happiness. He gasped awake in a bed that smelled like lavender and morning sunlight. Soft sheets. The sound of children laughing somewhere downstairs. A woman's voice calling, "Breakfast is ready." Marcus sat up, disoriented. His hands looked different, younger, calloused in new ways. Wedding ring. Photos on the nightstand showed him with a beautiful woman and 2 kids he'd never seen before but somehow knew. Tommy and Sarah. His children. In this life, these were his children. The memories flooded in like water filling a drowning man's lungs. This Marcus was a carpenter. He'd married his high school sweetheart, Elena. They'd built this house together, literally, his hands had shaped every beam and board. They'd never had much money, but they'd had enough. Always enough. Days blurred together in a montage of beautiful simplicity. Sunday dinners with extended family crowding around a too small table. Tommy's first bike ride without training wheels. Sarah's piano recitals where she played just slightly off-key but with such earnest concentration that it didn't matter. Elena's hand in his during evening walks, her head on his shoulder, talking about nothing and everything. He coached Little League. He fixed neighbors' broken fences. He attended church socials and community barbecues. He knew everyone's name in his small town, and they knew his. The years passed like a gentle river. Tommy got a scholarship to college. Sarah became a teacher, just like she'd always wanted. Elena's hair turned silver, and Marcus thought she'd never been more beautiful. They grew old together on a porch swing he'd built with his own hands, watching grandchildren play in the yard. On a quiet Tuesday morning, surrounded by 3 generations of family, Marcus closed his eyes for the last time. Elena held his hand. Someone was crying softly. Someone else was whispering a prayer. He felt no pain. No regret. Only a deep, warm contentment, like slipping into a bath after a long day of honest work. And then he was back in the breathing room. The gatekeeper stood exactly where he'd been before, as if no time had passed at all. But Marcus remembered 78 years of life. He remembered everything. The weight of those decades pressed against his consciousness like a physical thing. How? Marcus's voice cracked. How long was I gone? No time at all, the gatekeeper replied. All time. Time is flexible here. Marcus looked down at his hands. They were his original hands again. 34 years old, unblemished by the decades of carpentry work he could still feel in his muscle memory. He could still smell Elena's perfume. Still hear Sarah's laugh. That was. He struggled for words. That was beautiful. That was everything I ever wanted. Was it? The gatekeeper's tone was unreadable. Yes. Marcus felt tears threatening. I had love. I had family. I had purpose. I mattered to people. That was real happiness. The gatekeeper tilted his head. And yet, here you stand. 2 doors remain. Aren't you curious? Marcus stared at the remaining doors. The metallic one. The ancient stone. Part of him wanted to stop here, to somehow make that first life permanent. But another part, a part he didn't want to acknowledge, whispered that he'd already lived that life. The curiosity was unbearable. If I choose another door, Marcus asked slowly, what happens to that life? To Elena and the kids? They were never real, the gatekeeper said simply. And they were always real. They exist in the space of possibility, Marcus. The quantum foam of what might have been. You experienced them. That makes them real enough. Marcus felt something twist in his chest. But the second door called to him, its metallic surface reflecting a version of himself he'd always wondered about. The man who'd taken risks. Who'd reached for more. He touched the second door. Reality shattered again. The second life, power. Marcus woke in a penthouse office, 40 stories above a glittering city. The skyline stretched before him like a kingdom he'd conquered. His reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows showed him in a tailored suit that cost more than most people earned in a month. This Marcus had made different choices. He'd taken the job in New York instead of staying home. He'd worked 100-hour weeks. He'd sacrificed relationships for opportunities, comfort for ambition. And he'd won. Web Industries. His company. His empire. He'd revolutionized sustainable technology, forcing entire industries to adapt or die. Presidents called him for advice. His TED Talks had hundreds of millions of views. When he spoke, markets moved. The memories cascaded. The all-nighters. The hostile takeovers. The moment he rang the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange. The Forbes cover. The grudging respect of rivals who tried to destroy him and failed. He'd had relationships, beautiful, brilliant people who orbited his success like planets around a star. But none of them lasted. How could they? He was always moving, always building, always reaching for the next achievement. There were casualties. A brother who'd asked for help with a failing business and been refused. Marcus couldn't let sentiment interfere with principles. Former friends who accused him of changing, of forgetting where he came from. He'd had to let them go. They couldn't understand what it took to operate at this level. But God, the impact he'd made. His green energy patents had reduced global carbon emissions by 8%. 8%. His charitable foundation had put 100,000 kids through college. Cities competed to host his factories, knowing he brought prosperity wherever he went. At 67, he stood before the United Nations, receiving a humanitarian award. The applause washed over him like a wave. The speech he gave would be quoted for generations. He'd shaped the world. He'd mattered in ways that would echo through history. That night, alone in his Manhattan apartment, surrounded by awards and accolades, Marcus had a massive stroke. He died before the paramedics arrived. Alone. But significant. So terribly significant. The breathing room coalesced around him once more. Marcus staggered, his mind reeling from the whiplash of 2 complete lifetimes crashing through his consciousness. He'd been a simple carpenter. He'd been a titan of industry. He'd died surrounded by love. He'd died alone in triumph. Which one was real, he gasped. Both, the gatekeeper said. Neither. Does it matter? Marcus looked at his hands, these strange, neutral hands that had built houses and signed billion-dollar deals and done neither. The second life. I changed the world. I actually changed things. You did, the gatekeeper agreed. 8% reduction in carbon emissions. Quite impressive. Of course, you also destroyed 3 competitors, bankrupted their employees, and your brother died homeless, but one must break eggs to make omelets, yes? The words hit Marcus like a slap. He'd forgotten about his brother's death in that life. No, he'd ignored it. Pushed it away as an unfortunate but necessary cost of his principles. He felt sick. I helped so many people. You did, the gatekeeper said, his tone utterly neutral. You also left a wake of personal destruction behind you. So which was it, Marcus? Was it worth it? The power? The impact? The legacy? Marcus couldn't answer. Both lives felt real. Both felt like his life. The carpenter who'd built a family. The magnate who'd built an empire. Which one was the real Marcus Webb? One door remains, the gatekeeper said softly. The ancient stone door seemed to pulse with an otherworldly light. Marcus could feel something emanating from it, a cold, alien intelligence that made the hairs on his neck stand up. What's behind that one? Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. The gatekeeper's smile grew sharp. Truth. Knowledge. The thing your species claims to want more than anything else. But I'll warn you, Marcus, truth has a price. And some knowledge, once gained, can never be forgotten. Marcus stared at the door. He'd lived a life of simple happiness. He'd lived a life of world-shaking achievement. What more could there be? Everything in him screamed not to open that door. But he'd come this far. And the curiosity, that terrible, human curiosity, wouldn't let him stop. He reached for the stone. The gatekeeper's eyes gleamed with something that might have been anticipation. Choose wisely, he whispered. Or don't. Either way, you'll learn. Marcus's hand touched the cold stone. And reality didn't just shatter. It screamed. Marcus woke up in a hospital bed. Fluorescent lights. Beeping monitors. The antiseptic smell of cleaning supplies. A nurse noticed his eyes opening and called for a doctor. His wife, his actual wife, Rachel, rushed in, tears streaming down her face. Marcus. Oh God, Marcus, you're awake. The doctors said it was a miracle. The accident was so bad, they didn't think you'd make it, and then you were in a coma for 3 days, N. But Marcus wasn't listening. He was staring at his hands. These hands. His original hands. 34 years old. Unmarred by carpentry work or boardroom battles or equation-scrawled notebooks. He'd made his choice. Or had the choice been made for him? He couldn't remember which door he'd reached for. Couldn't remember the moment of selection. It was like waking from a dream where you could remember the emotions but not the events. But he remembered the 3 lives. Every moment of all 3. Elena and the kids. The Empire. The terrible truth beneath reality. They were all still there, in his head, coexisting impossibly. Rachel was crying, hugging him carefully, afraid of hurting him. The doctor was explaining something about brain swelling and induced comas and incredible luck. His daughter, his real daughter, Emma, stood in the doorway, clutching a teddy bear, looking scared and hopeful. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, to say something, anything. And realized he couldn't tell them. How could he? How could he explain that he'd lived 3 entire lives in the span between dying and waking? That he'd seen the fundamental nature of reality? That he understood something terrible and beautiful about consciousness itself? He couldn't. No one would believe him. They'd think the accident had damaged his brain. Maybe it had. Or maybe. He caught a glimpse of his reflection in the darkened window of the hospital room. And just for a moment, standing behind him in the reflection, he saw the gatekeeper. Still there. Still watching. Still smiling that knowing, ancient smile. Then he blinked, and the gatekeeper was gone. "I love you," Marcus told Rachel, the words feeling strange and true and inadequate all at once. "I'm here. I'm back." She kissed his forehead, and Emma climbed carefully onto the bed, and the doctor adjusted his and life continued. But Marcus knew, with the strange certainty that came from having lived 3 impossible lives, that this wasn't the end. The gatekeeper was still out there. The choice was still being offered, to countless souls, at countless thresholds. And someday, when Marcus finally died for real, not in an accident, not in a moment between moments, but at the true end of his original life, he'd have to make that choice again. Would he choose happiness? Power? Truth? Or would he, like the gatekeeper himself, find a 4th option that no one had told him existed? He didn't know. But he had the rest of his life to decide. Marcus Webb closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 3 lifetimes pressing against his consciousness, and wondered which of the lives he was living now. This one felt real. But then again, so had all the others.